Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here. Welcome to episode 284 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. A podcast listener named John Fritz joined me on the show today to talk about whitetail deer hunting. Now, this isn't just a run-of-the-mill episode about deer hunting, though. No, John is completely blind, yet he still goes deer hunting every year and often fills one or more tags. Indeed, he actually cleanly harvested a buck at 295 yards with a single shot just this year. So in this episode, we talk a little bit about John's background, what spurred him to start hunting, the various systems he has used over the years to allow him to safely and cleanly harvest deer, some special practical and legal considerations he has to keep in mind as a blind hunter, and what his future hunting goals are. We have a great show for you today, and before we get started, please make sure you're on my mailing list by signing up at huntingguns101.com. Now, not only is John Fritz, our guest today, a longtime podcast listener, but he is also a long-time subscriber to my mailing list, and that is actually how he and I got connected. We started talking about some of the systems that he had developed that allow him to hunt, even though he's blind, and that's what eventually led him to come on the show as a guest today. But anyway, click the link in the show notes or go to huntingguns101.com. Sign up there. You will get my free ebook when you do that, and you'll also start to receive the email updates I send out every weekday. If you like the Big Game Hunting Podcast, you will love those emails, which are both entertaining and informative. I get feedback all the time from people who get my emails telling me how much they enjoy receiving them. I also send an in-stock email update out every week to everyone on the list with some of the latest news on ammo I have found and where you can get it. That's huntingguns101.com or click the link in the show notes. Okay, let's get started talking to John about what it is like being a blind hunter. All right, well, good morning, John. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast with me today. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here, and I've been enjoying listening to your podcast for many years.
Yeah, it's always cool, like we talked about, getting to connect with people that have listened to the podcast, and every now and then I get guys that have listened to the podcast for a while on the show to talk about something interesting. So I guess, since you're a longtime listener, I got to ask you the question, do you recall how you found the Big Game Hunting Podcast and started listening to it?
I believe I was listening to a YouTube video put out by, I believe was Ron Spomer, and he mentioned you on there, and I thought I would look for you because you talked about different hunts that Africa and elk hunting and all the different things you did, and that's something on my bucket list, and I thought I'd go find a little more information about it so I know what I'm getting into.
Okay, well, good deal. It's always interesting how some of the same names, like Ron Spomer, Joseph Von Benedict, the Backcountry Hunting Podcast, they seem to come up a lot like that. So that's really cool. Well, the big deal that we're going to be talking about today is you are a completely blind hunter, yet you are able to go out there and successfully and consistently on a regular basis harvest deer. And so I want to talk to you about the ins and outs of that whole system that you have developed over the years of doing that, and share some of this with the audience, one, who just might think it's interesting, and two, like you mentioned, maybe be able to inspire some other people that have a limitation or a disability one way or another to be able to make some of those adaptations to their life and go out and do and enjoy the things that they want to do.
Absolutely, and I'm looking forward to trying to inspire either other people to do the same thing that I do or something similar, or let people know that they may have a father or a family member of some sort that may have developed a disability of some sort, and that's a lifelong love that they've always done, and that they could still do it. It just may need to do it a little bit differently than they used to. And you could still enjoy the same types of things outdoors. And some of the things I like to do is when I'm out there, it gets you away from the normal rat race and out there listening to the wildlife, listening to the birds, the squirrels, and other things going on. And then my assistant is out there with me who describes things that are too far away from me to be able to hear, that I would be able, describe what they're doing. And it's just enjoyable, the quiet and and all the other activity out there that if you just pay attention that's going on around you.
So being quote-unquote blind can encompass a lot of different things. There's people that are just legally blind where they can kind of see but just have really bad eyesight. There's people that are completely blind that lost their sight part way through life for one reason or another, an injury or an illness. And then there's people that were born completely blind. You were born completely blind, is that correct?
Just about. I did have some light perception, a little vision up until I was like 3 years old or so. Some basic colors and basic shapes, but not a lot of detail. And then I had a little bit of light perception up until 1996, and then I had some surgery, and then I lost everything. But from about 1990 to 96, what little I had was not very useful. I might be able to tell if a light was on in a room or something, but in the last 20 plus years, I've been totally blind, and that's really all I know. I don't know much different than that, and that's how I've been operating all my life.
So, let's tell the audience a little bit about your life and some of the adaptations that you've made to navigate the world as a blind person.
Sure. I grew up on a family dairy farm in southwest Wisconsin back in 1966. And I'm the oldest of 5 kids, and there's 7 years from me to my youngest sister. So my parents are pretty busy, raising kids along with doing the farm work to, do anything out of the ordinary that they would do with any other child, which I really appreciate that they did. They did not, their expectations of me were the same as any of the other kids. And I'm the only one of the family that, was blind. And that was because when I was born, I was put into an oxygen tent back in the 60s, and they didn't know any different. And that is, destroys your retinas and when you're in there too long and things like that. But, nevertheless, that's what it is, and that's what I deal with, and we just find ways around it. And my expectations on the farm were doing the same things as everybody else. I just had to find different ways to do it. And my dad was patient enough to help me figure out some ways to do things. And, like when I grew up and I was in high school, I had to milk cows in the morning before I went to school. And I did the normal schoolwork in a standard public school, and I was out for sports. I was a wrestler, and I did those types of activities. I was very, involved with Future Farmers of America, or FFA. I did that for several years and became a leader in that while I was in high school. And I showed at fairs and did all those types of things in addition to the farm work. And that was expected of my brother and I to do most of those kinds of chores, and my sisters did other things. And so that was, how I grew up, and I didn't know any different. Then I went on to college and navigated that world doing the same types of things. And I did not know too many other successful blind people at that time. But when I was in college, I found the National Federation of the Blind and won a scholarship from them. That's how I found them. And that's what actually paid for all my most of my college, actually, is I applied for numerous scholarships. I think if I added up, my whole college career cost me like $15,000, and I got like $12,000 in scholarships during that time back in the 80s. That's cheap compared to today.
That'll get you one semester these days if you're lucky.
Exactly. But one of the other added things that I had to do is I had to hire readers to read the textbooks and things like that to me. And I kept records of that. And of that $15,000, $3,500 of it was me paying readers. And, and I found ways of raising money and working and things to do that. And that's how I did it at that time.
Now, that is an interesting thing, just how maybe a good example of how technology has changed your life for the better. Because I assume now that if a person were, say, going to college, that the reader thing wouldn't necessarily be as much of an issue. You could probably find a way to have it spoken to you from a computer or something, right?
That is a possibility. However, readers still have advantages for reading some things, as well as quicker at finding materials and filling out forms and things like that. But as far as for reading books and things like that, yes, I can usually get the textbook in digital format and have my computer, my iPhone read it to me. Or we have apps on our phones that you just lift the phone up above it, take a picture, and it'll actually OCR it and read it to you. That's how I do my mail and other reports in my business today.
Oh, very interesting. So what do you do, if you don't mind me asking, what do you do for your business?
Absolutely. I'm technically called a vendor. I'm in a program called the Business Enterprise Program here in the state of Wisconsin, and that allows blind people have to run vending businesses in federal and state facilities here in the state. And where I typically work is I have 3 prisons that I go and service vending machines in, and 2 rest areas at this time. And I hire a driver, and we go and get everything ready in our warehouse, load up our vehicle, drive out to the site, take everything in, go through security and all that kind of good stuff, and put all the fun stuff that people like to purchase and buy while they're visiting their members that happen to be in the facility. Mm-hmm. And then also for staff as well that happen to be there. And that's something I've been doing since 2003. So right at 20 years I've been doing this.
Yeah, so I spent a long time in the Army, and then actually when I was a kid, my dad worked for the federal government, and so he and I both used Skillcraft products quite extensively during our time in, and I know that was stuff that visually impaired or blind people made as part of that company for the government like that.
Yep. Okay. Well, excellent.
All right. Well, so do you still live in Wisconsin?
I do.
And so, big state with a very large hunting culture. What was it that got you into hunting, and when did you first get into hunting?
That's a really interesting story. And listening to your podcast that you put out, was it Monday, with you and your son going to Arizona for the mule deer hunt, mm-hmm. brought back a lot of memories, because that's kind of how I got in it. My son Andrew came home from school one day when he was like 7 or 8 years old and said, "Can I go deer hunting with you?" Because all of his peers at school were going with their dads deer hunting. Mm-hmm. and I said, well, I did some when I was in high school, went up with my brother and my dad and things like that. And I went for many years just out with them. And a couple of years I tried going out, finding a way to do it, but we did not find a successful way that would work for us to harvest a deer. But I still enjoy going out there, being with them and things like that. And so I did not tag my first deer until just in the last 2011, I think it was. And that was the time when I mentioned that Andrew came over from school, was asking. I said, okay, we'll figure something out, and I'll try and get back into it and see if there's any technology or something that would be more useful. So I started asking people and checking around, and did some searching on the internet and things like that. And I found an organization called NASA, NASA, which stands for the North American Squirrel Association, out of La Crosse, Wisconsin, which is about 45 miles from where I live. And talked to a couple of people there, and their mission is to help people with disabilities to better enjoy the outdoors. And one of the things they do is hunting. Mm-hmm. And so I thought I'd see if, and I found a couple people there that were, at least one person anyway, that was a blind hunter, and his name was George, and he and I end up meeting at that there, and we hunt together today, and we started talking about different methods of doing it. So at that time, what was doable was we used a laser we put on the rifle, and use that as our pointer in order for our assistant to be able to see where the impact of the bullet would go then. Mm-hmm. And in the state of Wisconsin, it's one of maybe 5 or 6 states that allow people with disabilities to use lasers. We were one of the first states to do that. And still today, there's not very many that allow lasers to be used, since it's considered artificial light, and it's prohibited in most areas.
Yeah, actually, just as a quick aside here, and for the listener, what he's talking about is most states prohibit the use of a laser in that way, or anything that projects a any light whatsoever onto an animal. So a red dot sight on a rifle or a handgun would be legal to use, but a laser pointer or something like he's talking about, most places is not legal to use. So is this something that is legal in Wisconsin but only for disabled hunters?
That is correct, and it's only for a blind hunter.
Okay, got it. All right.
So other disabilities, other physical disabilities, it's prohibited. We have different classes of permits you can get for a disabled hunter in Wisconsin. They're listed as A, B, C, and D. A and B are typical mobile disability issues like walking and things like that. That applies to that, and Class C is considered a blind hunter or a hunter with a visual disability of some sort. And Class C is allowed to use laser pointers of some sort on your gun to be able to hunt with. And it applies to bows as well. Mm-hmm. And crossbows are legal here to use in Wisconsin as well. And it has been always for disabled hunters, but now it's any hunter can use a crossbow at this point in Wisconsin. And so that's what we started out with, and I took several deer doing that. The limitation we ran into is past 100 yards, it's pretty difficult for our assistant to find the pointer what it's pointing at. And it takes a special kind of a laser to use. It has to have enough intensity and not project too big of a dot onto your target. Otherwise, it tends to scare the deer. And like, for example, my first deer I got was a 7-point buck, and the laser at about 100 yards is probably about the size of a quarter, 50-cent piece. But when I was putting the laser on the deer, it'd be shining on its shoulder, and it would see that, and it was distracted by it. So it didn't even pay attention to me at all. And it was following it. If it, was projected onto a tree trunk or something, and when it was on the deer's shoulder, it would turn its head and try to lick it off. And so it was pretty well distracted. So I was able to get pretty close when I actually ended up harvesting that deer. But I was going to back up a second here and tell you how I got into this program too, with my son coming home and was interested in wanting to know how, if he could go hunting with us. And once I found this organization and got connected with them, then I took him with me on the first hunt, and that's the one I was just describing. He was with me when I got it, and actually when I pulled the trigger, the deer was only about 20 feet from the end of the barrel of my rifle, so it was a good shot. It walked about 80, 90 feet down a trail and turned around, lay down, and that's all there was to it. And we went to go retrieve it, and he was I think he was like 8 years old at the time, and he sat on its shoulders and held up its head, and we took lots of pictures of it, and he was super excited about it. And that was fun to watch.
That is super darn cool. So you originally started out doing this, when your kid was young like that. You used a laser for a period of time, but you've since evolved your setup a little bit as, I guess, technology has probably improved, right?
It has. And then the next device that I used was a device called an iScope. And about 2015, I believe, I found it, 2016. And this would allow me to put your mobile phone on the back of the scope, and the camera would be able to look down through the scope and see the crosshairs, and then on the screen would be projected that image, and then my assistant could look over your shoulder and see what was on the screen, and then give me targeting instructions on how that would work. And then I used that for several years, and then I ran across another device that was going to be coming out soon with the Tacticam company. Mm-hmm. And they were developing a device called the FTS, Film Through Scope, which would mount to the back of your scope, and then you could mount their cameras on that. And it was designed originally for the Tacticam 5. And that would then be able to pick up the image through the scope using a couple different mirrors to change direction, and that also allowed a person to still look through the scope normally. If people haven't seen that yet, but that device allows that to happen. And then there's a Wi-Fi setting on the camera that we turn on and project the image onto a mobile device or tablet. And then our assistant can sit back in their easy chair behind us or beside us or wherever they happen, to be in communication distance, and relay the information to me to be able to get on target then.
And so this is what you have been using for your most recent hunts, right?
That is correct. And that I've been using that, I think. I know when I got my first one, I pre-ordered it before it was even released, like a month ahead of time, because I was very interested in doing that. And my understanding is whatever you could see through the scope, no matter the distance, you would be able to pick it up with this camera and project it onto another device after talking to a couple of people at the company. And then that would basically make my range unlimited. And the iScope kind of did the same thing. But this was a much better quality system to use. The iScope was kind of fragile in a sense, hanging off the back of your scope. And it was very difficult to throw it over your shoulder and walk through the woods and things like that without bumping it on things. And we've had one break off because the plastic just kind of, bump it too hard. It didn't stand up. But the Tacticam system is a much more professional type system that is designed to be able to take some of those types of abuses and things like that may encounter out there. And the Tacticam would survive like the fall that you indicated that you did on the rock there with your rifle. The iScope would not be able to withstand that at all. And so I've been able to, on target, I've practiced up to 300 yards using the Tacticam on steel. And we use steel to target practice with because then it gives me immediate feedback, which is very helpful. Shooting at paper and things like that is great for sighting in and getting accurate information, but knowing if you make good hits, that immediate feedback is a lot more fun to have, at least as a blind person anyway, because then you don't have to wait, minutes after you pull the trigger to find out how well you did.
Yeah, I mean, that's fun for me too. And it also saves you a trip either walking down range or having to look through a spotting scope or something like that to see where you hit. And it is nice. And so I assume that using this Tacticam system, especially now, that's how you practice at the range. You bring a helper out there with you and set
Correct.
It up just like that.
Yes, and I typically we have different size gongs that we use a lot of times, and we always hang them is our method of doing it. And for deer, I typically use like a 4 to 6 inch one. Typically what the kill zone area would be, and that way, if you can consistently hit that, then we should be okay at hunting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, same system that I use, right? You just keep it in a circle consistently, whatever that range is that you can do that. Keep it in consistently inside that circle that's a little bit smaller than the kill zone of the animal. Well, that's your effective range, right? So you talk about shooting out 100, 200, 300 yards. What sort of rifle and whatnot are you using?
Well, when I first started, I was kind of curious on what it would be like for a blind person to go out even purchase a rifle. And so I went with my brother to a local gun store, and back in 2010, I believe it was, and walked in and, I told him what we were looking for, and I need something inexpensive because I didn't want to put a lot of money into it in case things didn't work out. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have too much tied into it. And we found a budget rifle that was on I think it was, they called it their scratch and dent shelf. Mm-hmm. And it happened to be a Savage 110 30-06 with a scope and everything on it. So that's what I started with it. I was able to pick it up for less than $400.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
And then I got into my brother was into reloading and stuff a lot. So we came back and loaded up a bunch of rounds, went out, and he helped me get it sighted in, and we got this laser mounted on it and sighted in at 100 yards, and that's what we started with. But since then, my collection has significantly grown, and I went from the 30-06. I bought my son a 308 when he was younger. So, and when my 30-06 was down one time, because I had to send the scope in for some repairs and got it warrantied, and so I used that, and then I used picked up 3 years ago a 6.5 Creedmoor, which I was not excited about, like I heard several of your listeners are not too big fans of, and I was the same opinion. But I thought, well, this would be a good backup rifle for somebody who needs a little less recoil and things like that. So I decided, well, I'm going to get first blood with it. So I took it out my first year and got 2 deer with it, and with 3 shots, and one deer I had it took a second one to finish it off. And other than that, it's done well with me. I've gotten 5 deer with it with 6 shots.
Oh, well, there you go. Yeah. Some people, as the Cartridge, some people love to hate and some people love to love. I like it.
Exactly.
A lot of people on the show like it, but some of them really don't.
and the deer I got with that rifle ranged from 65 yards to 215 yards.
Do you recall what ammo you were using on those hunts?
Absolutely. I used the well, actually, I reload my own right now, so I do all my own loading, and I use the 127 grain Barnes LRX bullet, and that's a wonderful all bullet. I use for ammunition anymore. Is I use all copper. I've been using that for 6 years.
Now, do I remember right that you've also used a 270 on some hunts?
I do. This year is the first year I did that, and I won one on a raffle at one of our North American Squirrel Association fundraising banquets that I attended last March. So I won this on one of those raffles, and I rigged it all up, and I put the best scope that I found to let enough light in to the camera to extended hours is the Vortex 2.5 by 10 by 44 Viper scope, and that's what I have on all of my deer guns now that I use. Well, that allows enough light to come in.
I'm glad to hear that you're loyal to the companies and whatnot that are also present in your home state.
That's what I decided, because I'm less than an hour and a half from their place, and I've visited a couple times now. And actually, I talked to Ryan down there, who's on their nation's podcast, in person, to ask him, what kind of scopes would you recommend for me to use to let enough light in at the beginning of and ending of shooting hours, because with the iScope, I would lose the first 30 and last 30 minutes of shooting time, and often the last 30 minutes is crucial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the best time of the day that you're losing there. If you only lost 1 hour, that's the worst hour to lose.
Exactly. And so he told me about this scope that he's used for coyote hunting and things like that at night. So I bought one and got it and tried it, and it reduced it down to 5 to 10 minutes on each end that I lose now. And so that's made a big difference. And if it's cloudy or out, I may lose more. If it's sunny out, I lose less. Now, so it depends on the type of day sometimes.
Yeah, that Viper is a good scope. I have the I think it's the 4.5 to 16 version of it, and it's a great scope. So yeah, it sounds like he steered you right with that, and I'm glad you've had good results with it. Now, switching gears just a little bit here, in my research for this show, it seemed like just about every single case I could find, at least of news reports of blind hunters, darn near every single one of them, maybe every single one of them, was in Wisconsin. And it sounds like that is a case of that's the state that has the regulations most conducive to allowing people to do that. Is that your understanding as well?
Well, I haven't had an opportunity to hunt in other states, so I'm not very familiar with it. I've helped research other people in other states so they could start hunting. Mm-hmm. and it seems like we're less restrictive than other states are, by doing research on their Department of Natural Resource web pages and what disabled hunters can and can't do, and things like that. So it seems to be that way. And more than likely, any other ones that you did your research on, I probably know them.
Yeah.
We've hunted together.
Yeah, I'm sure that's kind of a small, tight-knit community of people. In most of these stories, especially the ones that happened a longer time ago, it seemed like it was a very primitive system that they were using, sometimes of a guy just sitting maybe right behind the blind hunter and literally just talking him onto it, looking over his shoulder, maybe looking at iron sights or maybe looking through the scope or something, and then it's just evolved into a more sophisticated and technologically advanced system that you and probably other people use today.
Definitely so. That is the case, and things have gone a long ways from what it was back then. And there was one time when my Tacticam system did fail, and I had a deer at 80 yards. And I said, well, I'd like to get that deer because I want the meat, because we eat a lot of it. And I said, if I move off to the side a little bit, are you able to see through the scope for me? And he did. He leaned over and looked through it, and he said, okay, pull the trigger. So I did.
And it worked?
Only movement was vertical.
Oh, all right. Well, so let's go into a little bit more detail of, say, this most recent hunt, or just pick any one hunt that you were on that the story was interesting, and talk us through the process of getting from the truck set up, to actually pulling the trigger and recovering the deer and all of that stuff, so someone can better understand what it's like.
Sure. Typically, what would work is let's see. I like that 8-point buck one that you were talking about. We talked about earlier. Is a good story. I have found that anybody who knows anything about deer hunting, I can train them to be my assistant while we're out in the blind, waiting for the time to come. And we do lots of practice sessions and things like that. But if a deer comes up, typically how it would go is my assistant would tell me that there's a deer at your 1 o'clock, and then and he's and it would usually tell me a little bit what the deer may be doing. And if it's real close, we'll say less so we don't disturb it. But if it's several hundred yards away or something, we could talk fairly normally, and they don't even pay attention to us. At least here in Wisconsin. Maybe out in the wild it may be a little different, but I haven't experienced that yet. But here in Wisconsin, they're more used to people around and things like that. And I've yet to scare a deer by talking, moving but not talking. And so he would tell me that and then he would then get their rangefinder out, and so we have an idea how far away the deer is, and then he'd tell me what the deer's like, how big it is, it's their opinion, of course, and then I decide if I want to harvest it or not, and if it's something I want to go for, then we would then get into position so that I generally use a field pod. I have the old Caldwell field pods, Deadshot field pods is what I use. They don't even make them anymore. And that's what I've been using for many years. And we then get everything set up. How targeting directions would typically go. And they're not touching the firearm or anything. I'm the only one that is in control of the rifle. And they would say scan right, and then they'll say stop as soon as I'm close to the deer. And then we'll do smaller steps like a little up, go right, left, down, slightly up. And when they start giving the smaller movements like slightly, then I would start pulling the slack up on the trigger. And then once I'm right in the vital zone that we talked about ahead of time where we want to shoot, then they would say hold if I have the crosshairs right where I want it to be. And then if nothing moves, the deer doesn't move, I don't move, and then the next command will be fire. And before the whole word is out, the shot is gone. And I have noticed over time, well, this is happening, and this made a big difference in my accuracy, is when they're giving me that information of what the deer's doing, what it's like, how far away it is, I am totally focused on that target out there at whatever. In this case, it was an 8-point buck that was at 220 yards. And I'm picturing that in my mind, and I'm picturing the actual crosshairs on the front right shoulder of that deer. And that's where my focus completely is. And if I move a little bit, I can just picture that movement in my mind. And that has made me much steadier and more accurate over the years in doing it using that method. And so when the command fire is given to me, it's just, instead of eye-hand coordination, it's ear-hand coordination. I don't even think about pulling the trigger with my finger. You just do it. Mm-hmm. And so it's just an automatic reaction when you are conditioned to that word that you decide to use.
Man, that is very interesting. And so you said, for the most part, you've had very little vision throughout the course of your life. You've seen
Correct.
Light, but that's about it. So you've never actually seen a deer with your own eyes like other people have. And so are you visualizing it based upon a picture you've built in your mind by like touching a dead deer or something? How does that work?
Correct. An actual deer that I've harvested in the past, or the replica stuffed ones and things like that. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm kind of picturing. Okay.
And so the very small adjustments, or the trimmer and unsteadiness in a scope, that's really working out that stuff and figuring those things out is what really separates a good marksman from a great one. And it's difficult for me to picture how I would do that if I can't see how steady I am. I'm guessing you're doing this based upon just how steady it feels, and then based upon the feedback that you're getting from your assistant?
Yes, and for example, the deer I got this year, which happened to be my longest shot I've ever done, at 295 yards, is that we got on the deer, and he told me probably about 20 seconds before I pulled the trigger that I got to wait for you to settle down to find out where the crosshairs end up, because there's just too much movement. And as you know, at that distance, it's just a minuscule amount of movement is inches or feet out there. Mm-hmm. And so then I had to do something different, and I had to, go back to the old school of making sure I had the right hold on the rifle, making sure I'm breathing correctly, and doing all those commands, had the right grip on the rifle and everything. So I readjusted, and I sent you that video, and you probably heard him say that in there. And then when I made those changes, then it was enough that the bullet went exactly where it was supposed to go.
Interesting. And so, say at that range, we're getting to a point where even with something with a flat shooting cartridge, you may be dealing with holdover issues or something like that. Were you intentionally holding high on it? Did you input some corrections into your scope? How did that work?
I zero all my rifles at 200 yards, and before I go out to hunt, I just pull. And then I take, and on my bullets box that I keep all of my ammo in that I loaded, at the very end of it, I put it's called a way tag on it, and I use my phone to scan it, and it actually has all the data for that load there. And at the very end of it, I put the ballistic information. This rifle, I know I zero all my rifles at 200 yards. And then I have the drop from 0 all the way out to, I usually only go to 500 yards. And so I just keep in mind, the bullet drop from 200 to 300 yards. For this year, I used a 270, is 5.7 inches for the load I was using, and I know what the velocity was because I measured it on a coronagraph. So I had accurate information. I wasn't just using book information, and so that's what I used. And so I knew it was going to drop that much. So I just told my assistant when the deer comes out, we found out what the range was. I said, hold the horizontal crosshairs right on the top line. Make sure you still see hair. Don't don't have it in air, and we'll be right where we want to be.
Wow. Okay.
And when we went to retrieve the deer, we measured down, and it was right at 6 inches. Is where the bullet hole was on his shoulder.
Well, you clearly did a good job. One, with making a good load, and then two, measuring that stuff appropriately, relaying that stuff to your assistant, and then also just making the shot too.
There is a lot of pieces that have to come into play and fall into place, and everybody does their right job, and it works.
As Joseph von Benedict sometimes says in his podcast, when you get excited and when that puppy in your mind starts driving the train and the wheels start coming off the bus, it's bad enough when there's just one person doing that. But then you have an assistant that's also getting excited too, and he has to remember, oh yeah, I got to hold 5 or 6 inches high on this deer or whatever. Man, like you said, that's a lot that's got to go on.
Yep, and exactly, and the same thing happens to the assistant that happens to you too. Both of you have adrenaline going, and I'll tell you, back in 2020 when I was talking about that 8-point buck that we got, and my assistant was a brand new assistant that was with me. It was the first time he was ever with me to go out hunting, and we practiced several times on turkey in the field, and my range was up to 300 yards in that field. So we practiced on turkey heads that were about 275 yards away. And we just did everything but pull the trigger. And he just made sure that, am I steady enough? And I find out every time I go out, no matter who my assistant is, practice at least once or twice on a target, because that gives me an idea if I'm holding steady or not. Okay. And or do I need to change something? Do I need to do something different? Is something different than before that I am not aware of? So that way it kind of brings out those pieces of information that I may not know until I try it.
Do you recall what specific model Tacticam you use right now?
It's still the same one, the Tacticam 5.0, and it's use the FTS system. I also have a Tacticam 6 that I mount on the rifle to give just overall another view of it, not through the scope though, but the only one that works on the FTS for what we do that I'm aware of anyway is the Tacticam 5. I'm not sure about the Solo and those other ones that are out there. I've only had the 5.0.
Okay.
0.
Yeah, I think I have a Tacticam Solo. Actually, I have it right here. Let me take a look at it. What is this that I have? Yeah, I have a Tacticam Solo. I mount mine, though, I've only used it on a shotgun, and so I just mount it below the bore. And so it's great for filming shots, and like I've filmed, say, my crane hunts with it and whatnot. It would not work, at least this particular one that I have does not go through a scope like you would need to, like that on yours. And it's interesting. I don't know if that was something that folks at Tacticam even considered with blind hunters using their system like you, and I'm sure some of your friends do. I'm sure they just designed it as something cool to allow people to film their shots and show it with their buddies and all of that stuff. And it's just interesting the different use cases that pop up for some of this stuff as the years go by.
That is. The main office for Tacticam is in Caledonia, Minnesota, which is about an hour from where I live. And there's a couple times I had to have some warranty stuff done, so I actually just drove over there and they swapped it out for me. And one of the founders of Tacticam lives about 40 minutes from where I'm at. And I learned of him and got a hold of him and told him about it, what we're doing and things like that. So I've shared some videos and things like that with them and whatnot over the years of me doing it and using it. And they actually sent me a Tacticam 6, and I've been doing some testing with it as well, but it doesn't work through the scope because it's a totally different shape and it won't fit into the film through scope mechanism.
It's just funny how things work. I've had a couple of different hunters here in, say, the past month send me videos that they have taken with either a Tacticam or a different type of video that you can take through the scope, just to show me, okay, it's cool. And it was very interesting stuff. And then you sent me yours as well, and it was like I said, just a completely different spin on it. So it is really cool where technology has taken us these days, do interesting things like that, but it's also just helped people that one may not have been able to hunt at all, or people like you that were hunting. It just made it a whole lot easier for you to do the things that you want to do.
Exactly, and we've got, so there's probably at least 6 or 8 different blind people around here that I know of that use the same system. And actually, I sent you a picture of my daughter getting a bear, and she's totally blind as well, and she used an eye scope at that time to do the same thing.
Well, tell us a little bit about your daughter and some of her hunting experiences.
Well, one of the things that I required all my kids to do when they were growing up is to take hunter safety course, because we had firearms in the house, and I wanted to make sure they knew what to do and what not to do. If they encountered one, like when we're getting ready to hunt, there may be one laying out on the table while we're getting things ready or just before we go, and then they know not to do something with them, and so they're aware of them. And some of them decided they wanted to hunt, some of them didn't, and when Katie got done taking her turn at it, and she's totally blind as well, and she decided to wanted to go hunting with me. So and once she went on her first hunt back in 2016, I believe she was 16 years old. And she's been hunting with me every year ever since. And she's gotten, I think it's about 6 or 7 deer now. And she harvested a black bear back when she was that young as well. She got an opportunity to go on a black bear hunt through the North American Squirrel Association program. And so she's been doing that ever since. And I bought her a 243 to go hunting with, and that's what she's been using. And she uses the Barnes TTSX 80 grain bullet, and her rifle.
Yeah, there you go. The TTSX and that LRX you keep talking about, all great bullets for the sort of stuff that you're doing with them.
And on the bear she used the 180 grain TSX bullet from a 308.
Okay.
And that's the only Barnes bullet we were able to ever recover is out of the bear. It went all the way through the shoulders of the bear, and it was just under the skin on the other side.
Was that
otherwise they've all been passed through?
Was that a baited bear hunt?
Yes. Yep, that one was.
Okay, very good. Now, it's an interesting thing that you bring up that you hand load. How do you, just say, for instance, keep track of your different types of powders and things like that to make sure that you're using the right things?
Well, when I get a bottle of powder, either in the 8-pound jug or the 1-pound jug, I use a barcode scanner to scan it, to tell me what it is, and then I put a Braille label on the powder.
Okay.
And then I follow all the same safety things. You only have one bottle out on your reloading bench at a time, and I do all the same things. And then I'm using the new scale that RCBS Lynx, I think it's called, that has Bluetooth on it, and I connect that to my iPad, and then I can it'll give me the measurements of it when the readout on the screen on the iPad, and I can use my voiceover on the iPad to read that to me.
Okay. And so how do you verify the overall length of your cartridges and whatnot?
Well, I usually use ogive length. It's, to me, is way more accurate for what I'm doing, because I find too many differences, especially if it has a polymer tip. There's 2,000 or 3,000 difference in bullet length sometimes, I've noticed. So I use the ogive length because that's what engages the barrel. So that's what I go by, and I keep all those measurements on that weigh tag I mentioned earlier on the tag that I have on all my rifles, and I have the overall length of the bullet that I'm using as kind of a guideline, so I make sure it fits the magazine. Then I keep track of the ogive length and the headspace length, and I keep track of all that. And then I use a Bluetooth caliper that connects to my iPad that will give me the same readings that as soon as I press the button to send the data to the iPad, it'll actually read it to me and tell me what my length is then.
Wow, man. We truly are living in the future in many different ways. This is stuff that maybe even 10 or 20 years ago would have just been fantastical, I think, to imagine.
Yeah, that part only came about in the last 2 to 3 years.
Wow.
That piece. Before that, I had to use an assistant to read the stuff to me.
Yeah, interesting. And so it sounds like you still do a tremendous amount of stuff with an assistant, helping you shoot, someone driving
Absolutely.
you around, all of that stuff. But especially being able to take things and transcribe them and listen to them audio or in an audio version, I'm sure just simplifies so much stuff that was just a lot harder to do when you were younger.
Yep, and then if there's something else we need to find a different way to do it, we'll absolutely analyze it and then determine what is the best way to do the same thing then.
Okay, man. Okay, well, super cool. So let's go back and talk just a little bit more about just the legal side of things in Wisconsin, and then we'll wrap up. Do you have a special season specifically for blind or disabled hunters, or are you hunting during the general season with everyone else?
In Wisconsin, the Department of Natural Resources has a disabled hunting season, which occurs the first Saturday of October through the second Sunday of October. And I've been participating in that ever since I started hunting. And how that works is there are landowners that will sponsor this hunt, and they're listed on the website, and then you contact them in order to get their permission and to set up to go hunting on their property then. And that's what I did this year when I did this site, and it was a new sponsor who decided to put their land up, and I went to go hunting on their land with my daughter Katie and my friend George, and we hunted there, and George and I each got a deer there, and and it was just before the rut was starting. And the thing that we ran into this year is the acorns dropped about 3 weeks later than it normally did. So there wasn't a lot of deer coming out into the fields that would normally be happening during this season. And so our choices were a lot less than they normally are. And then after that season, then during the normal deer gun season, I normally don't hunt the big 9-day rifle season in Wisconsin. I usually, just leave that for my assistants' time to go. But if they're done hunting and, they still want to go out, there's been 2 or 3 times that later in the week I make arrangements and have gone out and gotten deer during that time. And then following the regular rifle season is the black powder season that goes for about a week. And then following that is an antlerless season, which I usually participate in. And then in some counties in Wisconsin, there's a holiday hunt that starts Christmas Eve and goes through the 1st of January. And I've gotten deer in all those seasons.
Okay, man. So
except for black powder.
Well, hopefully soon you'll be able to get one in the black powder season too.
Yep, that's my plan, and I'll try and arrange to give it a go again this year.
Well, how many deer are you allowed to take in a single season in Wisconsin?
My tag I got this year in 2023 was a buck tag, and I got 3 antlerless tags as well, so 4.
Okay. Well, very good. So all seasons combined with that. Is that how that works then?
Correct. And since I have a disability permit, if I haven't used my buck tag during the normal seasons, the DNR allows you to use it during any season. Actually, I can actually take a buck in the antlerless season with it if I haven't used it yet.
All right. Well, what are your future hunting goals?
Well, I'm going to continue the whitetail hunting here in Wisconsin. I'm hoping to go on a bear hunt again sometime and be successful. But down the road, I'd really love to go out west and do some elk hunting or any kind of hunting out there. I like elk meat. I've been able to have some from other hunters that gone out they shared with, and they grilled it, and it was awesome. And I'm hoping to be able to do the same thing for myself sometime. And then I don't know. I guess if I want to get really down the road, it'd be neat to go to Alaska and do some kind of hunting there. But I haven't really thought any further than that. But it's something that I want to go to be able to bring the meat home and enjoy it through the rest of the year, if at all possible. Or maybe even to Canada. That might be a good place to go.
All right. Well, good deal. That's some worthy goals to have there. In many cases, it's probably doable. You seem like you have the sort of attitude that you're going to approach a problem and analyze it and figure out a way to get through it. And so I don't know. I think there's things that will be difficult, but I don't know how much of that is going to be impossible.
I'm going to continue practicing longer range shots to be reliable and have confidence in. And my goal before I go elk hunting is I want to be at least confident at least to 400 yards. And I'm on my way to doing that. And my other bucket list goal I have is to make a 1,000-yard shot on steel. And I've got everything set up. I'm going to plan to try to do that next spring.
Well, connecting on a deer at 300 yards like you did is great for any hunter, never mind someone that's blind. So excellent work at that. You're already pretty well ahead of probably most of the hunters out there, and it sounds like you're only getting better. So excellent deal all around with that. And I congratulate you on your attitude and your just willingness to work at something and figure it out and accomplish those goals. That is really amazing.
And I'm really fascinated with the science and the physics and all that stuff in going into doing the shooting and reloading and the different terminal performance on the ballistics of what bullet does, internal, external, and terminal of all those, and learning what affects it and how you can improve my accuracy and just be successful in the end.
Yeah, definitely. That is an amazing thing that I enjoy looking at too. What would you tell someone that is also blind or has a disability of some sort? They want to get into hunting. What sort of advice would you give to them?
When I encounter people like that, I'd just like to talk to them and just learn, what their goals were, and sometimes it's somebody who's never done it. Sometimes it's somebody who used to do it and don't feel that they can anymore. And, which is usually they're the toughest ones to work through trying to get out to go again, because it's too different from what they're used to in their mind. And they're really reluctant unless you can take them by the hand and take them with you out there. That's the only way I've been successful at doing that. Just talking to them, unless they have the direct support with somebody who's willing to put the time in with them, it's a tough thing to get over in a lot of people's minds. But it's doable if they want to. I mean, I've worked with people that are quadriplegics, even going hunting, and they use different systems to do it, and they've had enough help and support with their assistants to go out. And, I even helped I think she was like 25 years old. She was a quadriplegic in a wheelchair, and she uses a bite mechanism to fire the rifle then. And we set up a system so she was able to do that. And there's been a few other people in similar situations that been successful at getting bear and deer and things like that here in Wisconsin.
Now, it sounds like not only does Wisconsin have just good regulations and special just hunting procedures and seasons set up for people with different disabilities, but it also sounds like you are part of a pretty good and pretty supportive community of people that helps each other out up there, right?
I did, and I did for 2 or 3 years. I actually ran one of the deer hunting programs here in my area of the state, and got to learn and meet with a lot of people and things like that. And so I was able to figure out how to make it happen for different people to do what they wanted to do. And we do the same thing with rifle and with crossbows as well. So we use the same processes and procedures in those instances.
Okay. Well, as we wrap up, is there any final parting thoughts or that you'd like to share with the audience, or would you like to share contact information for anyone that wants to get in touch with you or anything like that?
Absolutely. If anybody has any questions or knows somebody who wants to get back into hunting or knows of some opportunities that we can connect some people with disabilities up to be able to go hunting, I'd be happy to share my email. It is John Fritz, JOHNFRITZ 66 @gmail.com. And that would be the best way to get a hold of me. And if we need to communicate further, then we could do it on the phone or something at that time. That would be the most reliable way to initially get a hold of me.
All right. Well, good deal. Well, John, this was a fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you. I also just learned a lot and found it just very interesting. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me on the podcast today. Hopefully this is something the audience enjoyed too, and who knows, maybe we'll be able to help somebody out, maybe get them into hunting, that was something that they didn't even necessarily think that they were able to do. So thanks a lot for joining us today, and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that discussion and found it as interesting and inspiring as I did. I like to joke around and say that we're living in the future when I encounter or hear about something that's especially cool or technologically advanced. Well, many of the tools and systems John has found and or developed for doing tasks like hand loading and shooting deer at 200 plus yards fit into that category of quote-unquote living in the future, it seems like. If I told my grandfather that there was a camera someone could mount to their rifle scope and not only record the view through the scope, but transfer it to an iPad or an iPhone via Bluetooth, where another person could watch that view through the scope in real time and provide audio feedback to a blind hunter in order to talk them onto a deer and help them make a clean killing shot at 100, 200, never mind 300 yards, he would have thought I was describing something from science fiction. But that is science fact today with the gear that we have access to. And when you combine that with someone that has the determination to sit down and just make it all work. This is not nearly as simple as just slapping that camera on your scope and going hunting either. This is something that takes a tremendous amount of practice on the shooter's end at the range, figuring all of this stuff out, especially with regards to ensuring that you're got all of the fundamentals of marksmanship set, especially building that steady shooting position and somehow figuring out and verifying that you are indeed steady and on the target when you can't actually see it yourself, because that visual feedback that hunters like me and almost everyone listening to this podcast use in order to verify that they do indeed have a good steady position. The crosshairs are nice and steady on the target. It's hard enough when you can see that at extended range. But if you're having to do all of this by feel and by audio feedback from an assistant, it's clearly possible, but it's very difficult. And like I said, it just requires a lot of practice at the range. John was very modest about the difficulty associated with it and the necessary skill involved in doing so. But I can tell you it's hard, and my congratulations to him for figuring that out and making it all happen. Even so, it's still an amazing world we live in, and it is incredible what a person can do in order to adapt to various challenges, in order to accomplish tasks that might have seemed literally impossible just 10 to 20 years ago. Now, I posted a video of one of John's successful deer hunts on Instagram in order to give you an idea of how things work as his assistant talks him onto a deer so he can shoot it. As you'll see, it's a pretty involved process. Shooting a deer at 200 or 300 yards isn't exactly easy for a person who can see, and it gets a lot more complicated when the shooter can't see themselves and is relying on audio instructions to make a good shot. So click that link in the show notes to go to my Instagram profile and see that video for yourself. And make sure you follow my account while you're there too. Now, like John said too, feel free to contact him if you would like to discuss hunting opportunities for blind hunters in more detail. This includes both if you'd like help getting started down that road yourself, or if you would like to provide assistance to blind hunters in various ways. Like you said, his email is johnfritz66@gmail.com. Now, John also has good taste in cartridges, scopes, and bullets, and you would do well to follow his lead with a lot of that stuff too, especially his affinity for Barnes bullets. In that vein, click the link in the show notes, go to huntingguns101.com, sign up there to get my free ebook on the best hunting cartridges and to join my email list. And as we wrap up, please do me a big favor. Hit that subscribe or follow button in whatever podcast app you are using if you enjoyed this episode. Additionally, please leave a rating or a review for the show as well if you haven't already done so. Doing those things helps me reach other hunters like you who enjoy this sort of content, and you'll also start to receive my new episodes automatically every Thursday when I release them after you subscribe to or follow the show. It doesn't cost you anything to do that. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to the BigGameHuntingBlog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.